Sludge metal as a genre of music should not work in the slightest. Sludge metal is a mix of hardcore punk, one of the fastest subgenres of music, and doom metal, one of the slowest subgenres of music. Now, you would expect this not to work in the slightest, like I said in the intro, but goddamn do people from New Orleans know how to flip expectations. Sludge metal wasn't exactly an immediate success in the underground metal scenes, with seminal releases like Crowbar's Obedience Through Suffering, Soylent Green's Pussy Soul, and I Hate Gods in the Name of Suffering immediately setting the genre in the course of universal love by most members of only the southern underground metal scene, and surprisingly, the Seattle grunge scene, with bands like the Melvins being a huge inspiration to both sludge and grunge. But there was one band that I didn't mention for good reason. A band that, for a long time, was forgotten to time due to poor business decisions, a record label that held them back, and the death of a band member, only being remembered by those who they influenced with their mix of gothic rock, southern blues, death metal, doom metal, black metal, and hardcore punk. Until very recently, through word of mouth and the band's discography finally being put onto streaming services, this band finally got the recognition it deserved, even eventually leading the band from this cult classic broken up band only remembered by a handful of people into one of the biggest forces in not just sludge metal, but metal itself, even bringing back this band from the dead after nearly 30 years. I am, of course, talking about the infamous Acid Bath, my personal favourite band of all time. In this video, I'm going to be going over the past, present, and future of Acid Bath, going through the bands they influenced, and finally, a deep dive through their catalogue. Acid Bath began where the world ends, deep in the swamp of the Louisiana Bayou. It was born out of the death of two bands, like a demon coming out of a dead body, bringing forth Sammy Pierre Douay and Audie Pitre, with them joining a band called Golgotha, who needed a new bassist and guitarist, after their vocalist wrote songs too dark and disturbing for the previous guitarist and bassist's comfort. Covering topics such as abortion, the occult, murder, necrophilia, pedophilia, rape, and more unnerving topics, Golgotha, with his original lineup, officially released their first and only demo, being named Wet Dreams of the Insane. I'm not going to try talk too much about this demo, as pretty much every single song that is featured on this demo is featured later on in Acid Bath's discography in one point or another. The cover features a group of nuns with shotguns in front of a dilapidated city, and the demo's lineup features Dax Riggs on vocals, Chad Pierce on bass, Jimmy Kyle on drums, Jerry Boone Businelli, you know? There's nothing funny about that. Stop laughing. There's nothing funny. And Mike Sanchez on guitars. The demo features 11 songs and one spoken word poem, being named Apartment 13, Apocalyptic Sunshine, Reactor Number 4, Cradled in the Arms of Death, Finger Paintings of the Insane, Love Eats Its Own, Blood of God, Generation of the Zombie 2, a spoken word poem by Dax, Nothingness, The Mortician's Flame, and What Color is Death. Trying to listen to this demo now is rough to say the least, because it's very, very poor quality, but I also think that gives it its own charm to the demo, which I can't help but love. Standout tracks in this demo include Apartment 13, Nothingness, and Reactor Number 4. After the release of this demo, Golgotha changed their name, due to them realizing there was a plethora of bands already named Golgotha. The band decided to switch names to a name inspired by the serial killer John Hay and a joke punk band from the Louisiana scene which just disbanded, choosing the name Acid Bath. After choosing the name Acid Bath, the band began to record multiple demos, which for a long time were all extremely hard to come across online. This was until a dedicated group of Dax Riggs fans worked together to create an archive of every single piece of music Dax Riggs ever made, spanning from Golgotha all the way to Dax's solo work, known as the Skeletal Circus, which is where I'll be getting most of the music featured in this video, which leads us into Acid Bath's first demo, Screams of the Butterfly. Well, technically not an official real demo, as it's a live recording and not a studio recording. I feel it's important to mention this live demo as it already sets a high standard for what Acid Bath would eventually become, and it's clear that the band already had a pretty good idea of where they wanted the sound of the band to go.
songs that are featured on the demo, those being God Machine, The Mortician's Flame, Lord of This World, a Black Sabbath cover, What Color Is Death, Finger Paintings of the Insane, Dope Fiend, Inagata Davida, an Iron Butterfly cover, Scream of the Butterfly, an acoustic song that serves as a break between the heaviness of the rest of the demo, Nothingness, Tranquilized, Jezebel, and Sick Inside. All of the songs featured on this demo besides Sick Inside and Nothingness, and of course the two covers, are on Acid Bath's debut album, so I don't feel like I should really talk too much about them, and I think it's good that we just go on to Acid Bath's second demo, Hymns of the Needle Freak.
Being released in 1993 with no official name, this demo has been dubbed by fans of the band as Hymns of the Needle Freak, and features 8 songs, being Dr. Seuss is Dead, What Color Is Death, Scream of the Butterfly, God Machine, The Mortician's Flame, Dope Fiend, Finger Paintings of the Insane, and Jezebel. Yeah, motherfucker, I'm fine! And I'm thankful just to be alive. With the lineup of the band at this time being Sammy Duet and Mike Sanchez on guitar, Audie Petre on bass, Jimmy Kyle on drums, and Dax Riggs on vocals. This demo gives us a glimpse into what Acid Bath's sound would develop into later in their career, and already shows the band's amazing knack for creating amazing music. After the release of Hymns of the Needle Freak, Acid Bath would begin to tour all across the New Orleans scene, being welcomed in by the crowd, but not exactly welcomed by the other bands in that scene. According to the band, they were always seen as outsiders in the NOLA sludge scene, as Acid Bath's music was extremely different from the rest of sludge, using elements of goth rock, black metal, grindcore, emo, psychedelic rock, and hardcore punk. Due to how different of a sound Acid Bath had to the rest of the New Orleans/Louisiana sludge scene, there was apparently a big amount of tension with Acid Bath and Phil Anselmo of Pantera and Down fame. As according to Dax in a recent before I continue on, I should say that up until around maybe 3 weeks ago, a recent interview for Dax was maybe 10 years ago. When Pantera played at the big stadium in New Orleans, they mentioned all these local bands, but not us. It's like they almost didn't want to mention us, but people in the audience were screaming our name until they finally said it, and we got the biggest applause of all the bands that he had mentioned. I Hate God, Soylent Green, Graveyard Rodeo. It should also be stated that Phil might have had specifically an issue with both Dax and Sammy, as both have had told stories of not having good relations with him, with Sammy even refusing to elaborate on why the two have bad blood. But we can assume that Phil's issue with Dax was that Dax had been previously a childhood friend and boyfriend to Phil's then wife, Opal. And maybe also the story of how Phil tried to scare Dax at a party, but Dax, being the Chad that he is, punched Phil Anselmo directly in the forehead and broke his nose. That's right, this scrawny little fuck from New Orleans broke Phil Anselmo of Pantera fame's nose. It should also be stated that pretty much everyone in Acid Bath were all extreme users of drugs. Specifically, funnily enough, acid. And they often use these drugs before recording, going on stage, or writing songs, which sounds fucking terrifying. I would hate to perform while high on acid. That sounds like the worst idea possible. We'll talk about some more funny stories about the band and their drug use later on. But first, I think it's important to mention Dax Riggs specifically when talking about Acid Bath's uniqueness. And I want to go further into his backstory to try explain why he is arguably the most important member for this band's image. Dax Riggs was born on October 15th, 1971 in Evansville, Indiana. Dax Riggs from a very early age knew he had the talent of singing. According to Dax, at the age of 3 to 4, he would often sit and sing hillbilly songs with his grandfather. His parents divorced at an early age, and his mother was a Jehovah's Witness. Dax would often go from living with his parents to living with his grandmother, and then back to his parents again. Dax would often go into different neighborhoods as a missionary with his mother. At the age of 10, late at night, Dax saw a movie called The Elephant Man that would completely change his worldview forever. Oh, it was really crazy. Up until that moment, I believed God was good. My whole world turned upside down. I was like, okay, now I know God is bad. I started having all these nightmares, and that continued for years and years of being chased and hunted by the Elephant Man. No longer wanting to be a Jehovah's Witness, Dax moved in with his father in southern Louisiana. When he was 12 to 13, he started learning heavy metal vocals while smoking in the school bathroom.
At age 13, Dax left home and school to travel to Florida to begin work on what would be his first band, called Corruption. It's said that the band didn't really go anywhere, as all they did was play cover songs and take acid. So, not before long, Dax travelled back home to Louisiana. In Louisiana, he became intertwined with the local metal scene there, and eventually was able to found a band that we discussed earlier today, Golgotha, which eventually led us to Acid Bath. I think the thing that makes Dax so unique as a metal vocalist, and as a vocalist in general, is, of course, his vocal style, a mix of hardcore screaming to the melodic wails of torture, is his lyrical themes and how he puts them onto words. Dax's lyrics, on the surface, seem to be basic death metal lyric themes. Fucked up shit, gore everywhere, sexual content, extreme stuff. The thing that makes Dax's different is his way of translating those themes. His poems and his lyrics, even to this day, have this hint of genuine evilness. He is able to translate the mind of a serial killer to a maximum. Dax's lyrics are more than just some edgy teen writing the lyrics about death and torture. Dax fully gets into the mindset of what a serial killer would act like and what his thoughts would be. Some of these lyrics have genuinely horrifying implications, and his lyrics perfectly translate the band's image directly into the music of Acid Bath.
Now, getting back into talking about Acid Bath discography, let's continue with Demo 2. This demo fucking rules. This is the best representation to what Acid Bath would eventually sound like, and is, in my opinion, one of the best demos ever released. Even though all the songs would later be featured on their much better first album, it has this unique feeling around it that just makes the songs just different enough where they sounded unique. Features 6 songs. You, an early version of the song The Blue, Cheap Vodka, Tubabo Kumi, which is Cajun French for Land of the Cannibals, Cassie Eats Cockroaches, Tranquilized, and The Bones of Baby Dolls, another acoustic song which takes a break from the heaviness of the rest of the songs. After the release of Demo 2, Acid Bath would be shopped around by multiple different record labels before the band decided to sign to the infamous Rotten Records. Under Rotten Records, Acid Bath would release one of the greatest albums ever made, a perfect mix between heaviness and melancholy, When the Kite String Pops. I don't even know how to discuss this masterpiece of art without glazing it beyond belief. This is unironically in my top 3 albums of all time, and is a masterclass of metal. If you want to make sludge, this is an unnegotiable listen. This album feels like a descent into madness from the perspective of a drug-addicted, pedophilic serial killer. And boy god, do you get some vivid fucking descriptions of his thoughts throughout this album. This album features 14 beautiful songs. The Blue, Tranquilized, Cheap Vodka, Finger Paintings of the Insane, Jezebel, Scream of the Butterfly, Dr. Seuss is Dead, Dope Fiend, Tubabo Kumi, God Machine, The Mortician's Flame, What Color is Death, The Bones of Baby Dolls, and Cassie Eats Cockroaches. This album is and should always be universally loved. It is a masterclass in atmosphere and tension that doesn't let go, even in the acoustic songs, and I recommend it to everyone who's never heard it before, which is a complete and utter shame if you haven't. Upon release, When the Kite String Pops sold at roughly around 37,000 copies, which is insane when you think about the fact that they were an independent band signed to an independent label with absolutely no mainstream success or help. The band would then embark on a full US tour supporting the album, traveling across the country. While traveling, the band stopped in Florida for a week, where the group decides that in order to stop being bored, they're going to do Angel's Trumpets, one of the most well-known deliriants of all time. During this 3-day-long trip, Sammy recalls a time where him and Dax were walking on a beach, and then Dax fell asleep while walking. During this trip, Dax got some ideas for some new songs, and they began to work on what would be their next album, Pagan Terrorism Tactics, which, for fans of their first album, would be in for a real surprise with. This album is extremely different from Acid Bath's last album. It's less of an even mix than Kite String. It features a more melodic and less heavy style than their last album, being more focused on clean singing and slower paced and more experimental and melodic sounds before it hits you right in the face at the end with some of their heaviest songs.
Felt so goddamn good today. If I was ever alive, well, it's hard to say.
But don't take the less heavy approach the band took as the album being bad, as a lot of people actually think this album succeeds Kite String and is an overall better listen. I'm a massive Pagan Terrorism Tactics fan, and I also think it's another one of the greatest albums ever released. Though I do think I slightly prefer Kite String just because of nostalgia reasons. The album features 11 songs, technically 12, with the songs being Pagan Love Song, Bleed Me an Ocean, Graveflower, Diab's Soul, Locust Spawning, Old Skin, New Death Sensation, Venus Blue, 13 Fingers, New Corpse, and finally, Dead Girl. Dead Girl is extremely different from anything else Acid Bath ever made, and features 20-minute silence at the end of it, before a spoken word poem by Dax is uttered, this being the last song Acid Bath would ever release together. As after a short tour going across the US and Mexico, the band would face a tragedy, as on January 23rd, 1997, Audie Pitre, the band's bass player, and main person holding the band together at this point, due to differing ideas of where the band was heading, died in a drunk driving accident after a drunk driver ran a stop sign and hit him and his family's car. This death sent a shockwave throughout the sludge scene in New Orleans. Audie was a well-respected and kind individual who would always go out of his way to be as kind and respectful as possible. He was only 26 when he died. After Audie's death, Acid Bath was never the same. The band was almost directionless, you could say. They tried playing multiple shows with others taking over on bass, but it never felt the same. Acid Bath played their last show on April 25th, 1997, with the last words Acid Bath ever said as a band were, "We were Acid Bath. Thank you." According to Sammy, the band knew that this show would be their last, as all the passion had almost been drained from the band, leaving them directionless. And so, like that, Acid Bath was no more, left to be forgotten to time. That was, at least, until something peculiar began to happen. The band started to grow. Word of mouth kept this band's legacy alive, years past their demise as a band. A slow but loyal cult following built up around the band that slowly but surely grew around them, but strangely didn't seem to really help the band all that much, which can largely be blamed on Acid Bath's record label, Rotten Records. Rotten Records is infamous for being extremely old-timey, refusing to put Acid Bath music on streaming services for a long time, and even copyright striking down videos who repost Acid Bath songs, which means I'm gonna need to be really fucking careful with this video. Rotten Records has addressed their stance on copyright and streaming services, saying, Spotify doesn't pay shit either. None of the streaming services do. When they do, we'll get on board. You can preview Acid Bath on iTunes. Even with all this, all it did was build Acid Bath's cult following, as up until around 2021, you had to go physically looking for their music. In 2021, Acid Bath's music was finally put onto streaming, giving Acid Bath a huge boost in listeners, with them currently sitting at well over 300,000 listeners, making them one of, if not the biggest sludge metal band of all time. With all this hype and love spewing out for Acid Bath, you would expect a reunion to be in order, but for a long time, every single member of Acid Bath shut it down, with them all having their own reasons for doing it. But in 2024, something happened. A festival called Sick New World called up Sammy Dewey's new band, Goat Whore's manager, asking how much it would cost to get Acid Bath on their lineup. And Sammy made some calls and got Dax Riggs, Mike Sanchez, and himself to restart up Acid Bath to play Sick New World, Sonic Temple Festival, Welcome to Rockville, Incarceration, and Louder Than Life Festival, which I'll be at if you want to come say hi. And only a couple of weeks ago, Acid Bath announced 4 new shows in both New Orleans and in Los Angeles, with the April 25th New Orleans show being the exact same date as Acid Bath's final show, all the way back in 1997. With every day passing, it seems more and more likely that Asabath will finally be back in action, with it seeming more shows are on the way, and maybe even a recording of something. See, only a couple of weeks ago, as of writing this script, Sammy posted a group of reels showing the Asabath boys to be in a house of sorts together. In the house, we have Sammy Dewey, Dax Riggs, Zach Simmons, the drummer of Sammy's band's Goatwhore, and Shane Wesley, the bassist of Crowbar, another extremely respected sludge metal band. In a recent interview, which is genuinely recent, Dax stated this about his recording process for his new album, 7 Songs for Spiders. It was recorded in my studio with the Kite String Cosmonauts, guitarist Captain Lucas Brosnard, bassist Kane Cormier, and friends. The studio is in a quasi-abandoned building we're fixing up, and we had to share our space with the mischievous family of whiskey raccoons. One winter, the rats ate the knobs of the Moog synthesizer. When you look at this photo of the Asabath gang, what do you see in the background? A quasi-abandoned building that looks like it's being fixed up? And, as the cherry on top, Sammy liked this comment, which asks if the place they're in is the place where the rats eat the keyboard knobs. Plus, in recent interviews, Dax will not stop hinting at the fact that Asabath music could be coming out, with him constantly saying things like, "Only the devil on my shoulder knows." It's seeming more and more likely that Asabath might be recording new music, which is insane to think about, and makes me extremely happy. Now, after discussing the band's history and lore, I would now want to discuss the numerous bands Asabath has influenced, and how many bands you might love have Asabath as such a major influence. Starting with the band you've all probably heard of, you either love them or hate them, the Firing Kings, Slipknot. Slipknot, and more specifically Corey Taylor and Joey Jordison, have gone on to show their love of Asabath and name them as massive influences to the sound of Slipknot. Joey Jordison has been heard listening to the band in an interview, Mick Corden has a photo wearing a Pagan Terrorism Tactics shirt, and Corey Taylor has gone on several rants about Asabath, with him even citing Dax as the biggest influence for his vocal style, which you can definitely hear in the sound of early Slipknot. Finally, with Slipknot, on their newest album, The End So Far, Slipknot made a tribute song to Asabath called Acidic, which does sound somewhat similar to Asabath, but it still is late Slipknot, so it's shit. Our next band that cites Asabath as a major influence will be the infamous Korn. Korn has stated on numerous occasions that Asabath was a very big influence on their sound, and Jonathan Davis has been seen wearing an Asabath hoodie. With these two bands being influenced heavily by Asabath, Asabath is technically the cataclysmic event that caused the nu metal scene, the metalcore scene, and the current deathcore scene that's blown up in the 2010s that everyone loves, of course. Asabath has also gone on to inspire numerous lesser-known bands to start making sludge, with the most well-known being the Incredible Leak, who were a band around the same time as Asabath that is clearly very heavily inspired by them. And with that, I leave you with the story of a band that was destined to fail, but overcame all odds and became a titan of the metal scene, and will be remembered as one of the most influential bands in the history of metal. Thank you for watching.